Mother's Day is pretty close. I don't actually know what date it is, but I know it's in May, and this is April. I think it's like 4 weeks from now. So we talked about Mother's Day and stuff, and what could we do that would help people get ready for Mother's Day, meaning make something in your shop to give mom. And we came up with this. Here's what's going on. I am going to show you how to give your heart to mom. I'm going to show you how to put a heart inlay into a cutting board, but obviously this could go into anything. And we'll talk more about the inlays in a second and the kind of cool stuff you can get from this company. On top of what I'm doing right now, it's important to understand that we have got this whole cutting board extravaganza thing, which is a boatload of content about making cutting boards. So there are 4 different designs in there. There are videos about putting handholds, finger holds in the end of your cutting boards. There's information about making end grain cutting boards, long grain cutting boards. There's information about, I'm looking for a place to set this. There's information about doing juice grooves, a very simple shop made jig that you can use for that. So in addition to what we're doing now, whether it's for Mother's Day or something else, I would encourage you to look at and grab the information in that cutting board guide. And there's lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff there. The other thing that's important to understand is we're going to use a kit to do this heart work. Going to do a heart transplant into the cutting board. I just now thought of that. I'm very clever, or I think I am. And as I said, the company that makes this, Slab Stitcher, makes a variety of other inlays. I'm going to show you some of those. There's a link for the heart kit in the description of the video. So whether it's you want to do the heart thing like I'm about to do, or you want to do something else, that you can go to Slab Stitcher and find that. The heart link is the specific one that's in the description. So let's look at where we're going. This is one clearly I have already done, cutting board with this heart inlay in it. And the way that this inlay system works is that there's a frame. Into the frame, we put the template for the inlay that we're choosing to do. In the heart world, there are 3 different sizes of that. I am going to show you in just a little bit how to put one of these in. If you want to do multiples, it's simple. You just do this 3 times in 3 slightly different positions in order to get the look that I have here. When we do this, the way it works is guide bushing in the router. That's a very common approach to template cutting, and a 3/16 diameter router bit. So all of this stuff you can get from Slab Stitcher, the same place you get the templates. You got to make sure you're using the right diameter router bit with the templates. Otherwise, the inlays aren't going to fit. The inlays also come from Slab Stitcher. So that's what makes this cool, is that I'm not cutting a pocket with this and then trying to make this on a bandsaw and get it to fit. You get these from Slab Stitcher, and they're available in different flavors, and they're labeled. That one is cherry, Padauk, Osage orange. So, whoops. In the end, trying to switch cameras there. In the end, I'm not trying to sell Slab Stitcher products. I'm just telling you that there's a lot of cool stuff going on with Slab Stitcher, and it makes it a really easy way to customize stuff. If you've seen my main workbench over there, there's a big bear paw on that workbench. There's a deer track in that workbench. If you have my Live Edge slab book, it's got deer tracks in one of those Live Edge projects. All of that stuff is Slab Stitcher stuff. Let's look at what we got to do. Before I do that, I'm going to check for preguntas. Okay. No questions so far. So a little bit of prep. Obviously, the first thing is figure out where on your object, cutting board or whatever it is, you want to put the thing. After the inlay goes in, there's going to be a little bit of sanding to detail to flush up the inlay, not a lot. So on the preparation side, I've got this sand to do 180 grit. My final sanding will be 220. So sequence of events, I'll put the inlay in, I'll continue with 180, then I'll take the whole project up to the final grit before I put finish on it. My point out of that is that prior to doing the inlay work, this can be pretty far along in the sanding process, so you don't have to do excess sanding over the inlay system. And I'll also mention on some of their stuff, like bow ties, you can, in addition to wood, you can get them in non-ferrous metals. So an aluminum bow tie, a copper bow tie, that's a pretty cool looking thing in a project. Next, figure out placement of the thing on the thing. So I'm going to want to do something about like that. With this particular inlay, there are 3 hearts included in the template that covers all 3 sizes. Obviously, I'm doing the biggest one. So this kind of placement means I have to end up something like that. We want to use this frame because it gives us more real estate to hold this whole thing in place. So what I'm going to do is put today's template into the frame like that. Now I can get to where I was with the heart and locate it. So it's going to end up about there. I'm going to do a couple things to get this in place. I'm going to do double face tape, and this is just to drive you crazy so that, because I have no fingernails, you can watch it take forever for me to peel the backer off the tape. I'm going to cheat because I know how bad this gets. You know, when you play a little acoustic guitar, and I don't pick, I strum. So you really don't want to have long fingernails. So that's number 1 is double face tape. Now again, I'm locating the heart so I can do heart surgery over here. And that tape is a good start to make sure I don't get any slippage. I'm going to do this. And this. So yes, I am wearing a belt and suspenders for this, but that's okay because we really want to make sure that this stays in place. Hang on, I'm in the wrong spot. There we go. There's a little void on my bench right there. Let's go back to that router setup. The way this will work, very common guide bushing stuff. The guide bushing, and I'm poking my finger in here because the battery's not in there. So the guide bushing is going to trace that shape. The router bit is going to take away the stuff inside. What's cool about this particular system is that I don't have to have a plunge router for this. On a lot of these templates, you're making the pocket and you're making the inlay. You have to have a plunge router to do that. I can do this with a fixed base router. And the way I do that is by starting with a boring step. I start by drilling a hole. The tape indicates a little bit more than the thickness of my inlay. So I'm going to punch a hole. And when I come over here, that's going to give my router bit a starting point. What'll happen, I'm going to start cutting. A lot of shavings are going to build up in there. I'll stop, run the vacuum, which is right there. I'll run the vacuum, clean the waste out, cut some more. So there's going to be some maintenance as we go on this. Let me look again before I start cutting, see if there are any questions. If you came in late, let me revisit a couple things. One is we're theming this for Mother's Day, but at the end of the day, these inlays are a really cool addition to lots and lots of different projects. If you want to put bow ties in something, if you want to just put any kind of decoration, any kind of inlay into a project, that could be the shape of a state. Slab Stitcher's got a lot of different stuff. The particular kit I'm using, the Heart Kit, is sourced for you in the description for today's live event. And if you just go to slabstitcher.com, you can look at all their different stuff. John says, use these guides for my first 3 boards. They were very helpful, especially the jigs. Oh, I think he's referring to the cutting board guides. So that's the other thing I should have re-mentioned, is that if you look a little further down on the page, we've got a big cutting board thing that you can have a look at. And it's got information about end grain cutting boards, long grain cutting boards, different designs of cutting boards, making a simple jig for a juice groove, and a bunch of other stuff. So after we're done, go click on that and you can see a boatload of stuff about making cutting boards. John asks, spiral or straight bit preferred? This is an upcut spiral. And I like that in general if I'm making a pocket, because an upcut works like a drill bit and it helps evacuate stuff out of the thing that you're making. All right, we're caught up on questions. So I'm going to do the noisy part. And like I said, this will be a few steps involved in doing this, because I'll route a little bit. I'll have to evacuate the shavings, and then I'll route some more, but I'll get you on the other camera. I'm going to start with you on this camera so you can see a bigger picture of what's going on. And then once I'm in there a little bit, I'll bring you in onto the tighter camera. Are you ready for this? Start with, I'm randomly moving. And, I started in that hole I drilled, and I'm using the router bit to just freehand make that recess bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Noteworthy, I'm doing that in a clockwise direction, because then I'm working against the rotation of the cutter. If you go the other way, if the router starts to feel self-propelled, it's because you're climb cutting. Change direction. Now that I've done a little bit, we have that, which means we have that. And what will happen if I just leave that, the shavings pack against the template, and you can't get the guide bushing all the way out. So really it's second verse, same as the first at this point, which is more of the same. Now, while I'm stopped, let me point out this is just good router using advice. Notice that my hands are here with the heels of my hands resting on the template. So I talk about this in my classes all the time. Your shoulders and your arms are good for big movements. Your hands are good for small movements. If I hold the router up here and I'm controlling it, honestly, it's harder to control because I'm doing that with my whole arm. If I hold the router down here and I let my hands rest on the pattern, I'm controlling it with my fingers. And then if you're my age, you remember, let your fingers do the walking. That's what we're trying to do here is let your fingers do the guiding because they're good at fine movements. So anytime you're using a router, anytime you can, I talk about this on fine cuts on a bandsaw as well. If you can rest your hands on the work, it's going to give you finer control. I'm pretty close on at least one side there. I'm pretty close to the wall. It's very important when we get to the end or close to the end that we do a final pass in a clockwise direction to make sure that we're tight against the template. And then there's some little spots on the bottom that I missed. I'm going to come back and make sure I have all those cleaned up. But I've got a ways to go. I'm still pretty strong on wood on that side. Another thing to notice that I think is noteworthy is I route, very noisy. I turn the router off. It comes to a stop. Then I lift it off. Don't want to take any chance of pulling that router bit as it's winding down through the pattern or through your work. You saw probably at the end there, I did make a counterclockwise pass where I was pretty much right against the pattern, but there was dust in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back in again and I'm going to do another pass and make sure I'm perfectly tracing that template because again, remember the inlays are made to fit the result of the work I'm doing here. So if I leave it strong, I can feel right here there's a spot that didn't get completely cut. Then you're going to have a problem with your one more little high spot I can see. Right there. So your double check visually, and it doesn't matter which of these inlays you're using, the double check is look at the relationship between the wood and the template, and that should be a uniform offset we're using a guide bushing that's a different size than the router bit. So if that's an 1/8 of an inch offset there, it should be an 1/8 of an inch offset all the way around. No high spots. That's what tells you it's time to take that template off. I'm going to check for questions. And back to the question about straight or spiral router bit. When you go to Slab Stitcher, a couple things. If your router did not come with a base that'll accept a guide bushing, I'm pretty sure for this rigid router, I got this base from Slab Stitcher because the rigid base wouldn't accept the Porter cable style guide bushing. In addition to that, hold please. You can get in a kit form the big frame, the guide bushing, the router bit, the stuff and the stuff and the stuff. So check before you check out at the checkout on the website, check to make sure that you've got everything you need to be able to pull this off. And then I think there was another one. Sally says, could you do this with a plunge router? Yeah, you could. So then we don't need to drill the first hole. Set the depth of plunge so that you're at the right depth for the inlays, and then plunge, leave, vacuum, plunge, you got to make that noise, leave, vacuum, basically the same sequence of events. The point I wanted to make when I was talking about that is, again, some of these patterns are such that you have to use a plunge router. If you don't have if you have one, cool. If you don't have one, you can do this with a fixed base router, because we can start by punching that hole, and then into it we put this. So I think I'm going to do one last double check, or maybe I'm on triple check by now. This can come off. And then we should be able to do the heart transplant. But so one thing is, it says on there Padauk. That's the name of that wood. Put that down so you're not sanding. It's very nice that the flavor of wood is included on the thing. But just make sure you put the text down so you're not sanding later. It's right what I'm looking for. It's there. Little glue in the bottom. You really don't need to worry about putting glue up the walls because we have so much bond across the bottom. And I talked when I started, I had already set depth of cut on my router bit. That depth is such that when this goes in, it's going to be a bazillionth of an inch above this surface. I would rather have this a little bit high, then all I have to do is sand a little bit of Padauk heart and everything is flush. If this ends up too low, I have to sand this entire cutting board to get this to match up. So start gentle. And once it's started, we're going to change approaches here. Right there. So that's solid wood. It's solid Padauk. That's not like plywood or something. So as I continue to tap it in, I want to make sure there's no risk of cracking it. The easiest way to make sure I have uniform tapicity is to either do this or to do this and this. Looking to see that I'm over the inlay. The sound of a good fit. See where I'm at. Got to go a little bit more. I'm going to do a little bit of tapping to seat it a little more. And then one more squeeze. There it went. The last little bit. Now, we can do a couple things. Whoops. Keep punching the wrong camera button here. There we go. We can do a couple things. The fit is so good, in all honesty, this call doesn't need to stay on top of there. If you feel like you want to leave the call on top of there, do one more step, which would be put a little piece of wax paper over the call, over the inlay, then the call, then the clamp. It would be a shame if a little glue squoze out and stuck to this and that, and you couldn't get this off without fracturing something. Where that leaves us is the inlay is now in the cutting board and standing just a smidgen proud of the surface. It's exactly where I want it. If you want to do what I did before, if you want to do this, then do one of these first. So in this case, I did the maple first, the big one, just like I did here. Sand that flush, put the pattern back on, do the medium, that's walnut, sand that flush, install it, sand it flush, put the template back on, do the baby one, sand it flush, and you're done, 5 year younger. So same thing there. If you wanted multiples in that corner, you would do that by just repeating the process. Oh, while I'm on the other camera, I'll show you. So I'm giving you motion sickness. I showed you this already. So again, just examples of other stuff you can get from Slab Stitcher. Obviously, that's a fish. And that's a fish. The hearts we looked at. Bow ties. And then this is one I've used a lot. This is the deer track. There are multiple components to that. But in the end, it looks just like a deer track in your material. And there's a bunch more that I don't have in front of me at this second. So a nice, I'm concentrating on cutting boards here, but just in general, a nice addition to whatever you're going to make for somebody. And let me reiterate a few things. We have got the link for the heart kit, the heart template, in the description. If you really want to go down a cutting board road, you should definitely get this. Are we calling it the ultimate guide? I'm not sure. Building a cutting board. So when you click on building a cutting board, there are 5 or 6 videos of techniques there. End grain, long grain cutting boards, juice grooves, putting handles, finger holds on the end of a cutting board, plus other woodworkers, Shar Miller King, Paul Mayer, Alicia Albertson, myself, contributed designs. So you can look at that, different ideas about getting different looks of cutting boards. So if you want to pursue the cutting board thing, you should definitely grab that guide. And whether you're doing that for Mother's Day or craft shows, that's a great thing to look at. And then, like I said, with this inlay over and over again, it's just such an easy way to add a unique touch to anything that you're doing to give it a little more personalization. Paul says, wouldn't we follow the same process if we wanted to fill it with colored epoxy, route with the template, and then fill? Yep. So I have done that. I'm not leaving you. Well, I am leaving you, but only briefly. I'm just seeing if I got a thing. nearby. So Paul is talking about something like this. These are pockets that I cut and then filled with epoxy. So you could skip the inlay, do the route, do the heart or the fish or whatever it is, and then pour epoxy in there. So, yep, that would work. David, do you recommend finishing the cutting board after doing the inlay or before, and why? Definitely, it's got to be after because of sequence of events. So at the beginning of this, I talked a little bit about board prep. I sanded the board to 180, then did the inlay. The inlay at this second is a smidgen proud of the cutting board surface. Next step, I'll run a random orbit sander and I'll flush the inlay at 180 grit. I'll flush the inlay to the surrounding surface. Then I'll advance my grits until I'm ready for finish. If the board already had finish on it at this point, we'd be sanding the inlay, almost certainly scuffing the finish work you've already done. So it just heart, cutting board, lid of a box, fish, whatever the project in the inlay is, it makes more sense to have it raw, then do the inlay, final sanding, everything gets finished at the same time. John says, could you speak exactly how to set bit depth? I will, and I got to change cameras for that. So let me look at other questions and I'll come back. Slab Stitcher website, they include a spiral down cut bit with their starter kits. Any thoughts about that? So I could see with a down cut bit, you're protecting the surrounding surface. So that's going to be helpful depending on what you're working in to make sure that you don't uplift, you don't do a chip on the surrounding area. And then this is their thing. So their customer service is really good. If you want to ask them why a down cut, give them a call and ask them why a down cut or shoot them a message online. But in this application, either one, upcut or down cut, would work fine. So I'm sure they've got experimentation involved and there's a reason why they're going that route. What adhesive do you use on metal inlays? Epoxy, two-part epoxy. And then they're interesting. The metal inlays are very cool. I don't have anything here anymore. I put one in I put a metal one into a walnut cookie slab I made for my kid, and it really looks amazing against the walnut. So epoxy those in, and then same, if you leave that standing a smidgen proud, you just want to be careful with your sanding. I'm a big belt sander user. So I left that metal a little bit proud, scuffed it down with the belt sander to get it flush. If you do too much sanding, you can heat up that metal and melt the epoxy. So it's the same approach. You just got to be careful on the sanding step that you don't overheat that non-ferrous metal and then undo the work of the adhesive. But two-part epoxy is the answer. Gary says, if you use this for bow ties to cover a crack, which way should the grain of the tie go? Perpendicular to the grain of the material, typically. William, do they have STL files that could do the cutout with a CNC machine? Nope, because their business is making templates and inlays. What about room for glue? It seems tight, so no glue squeeze out. Well, it's got to be tight, otherwise you're going to have a gap around the edge that you would see. So it's basically a perfect fit, which is what you want, so you don't have gapicity. You don't, when you apply the glue to the bottom, if you puddle that glue, you're not going to get the inlay to the bottom. You've got a hydraulic issue going on there. So when I put the glue in, I was filming it around with the end of the glue brush, spreading it around with the end of the glue brush in order to make sure it was filmed out, and then you don't have any issues. Tim says, I noticed some of the inlays have inside corners that are smaller than 3/16. Do you switch to a smaller router bit for finish cutting? Great question. Great question. So in this case, with the heart, I could route and the inlay went right in because it's all soft corners that work with the diameter of that 3/16 bit. There are, so this is a bow tie with rounded corners. There are bow ties with square corners, or not necessarily square, pointy corners. In those cases, you use a hand chisel and you finish that pointed corner with a hand chisel, and then you insert the inlay. Going to a smaller bit wouldn't work because of we're using this size guide bushing. So you do everything with the 3/16 bit and this guide bushing. And then last step, if you need to, you finish off pointed corners with a sharp hand chisel. It's very easy to do. Let me go back to John's question about depth of cut. So I'm taking my battery off so the router can't run. The way I do this is we know we're going to be sitting on the template when we route. So I put the pattern on my router, then I lay an inlay on there, and then I set the depth so it's a little short of that surface. So instead of trying to measure how thick is this and how thick is this, if you just lay that on there and then set that bit so it's slightly below that surface, that's the easiest way to get that right. Okay. So I'm going to tap dance for a second just to make sure I don't miss questions. Not literally, it's an expression. Nobody wants to see me dance. A couple things. I'm being repetitively redundant, but the link for that heart kit is in the description for the video. If you want to know a boatload of stuff about cutting boards, grab that building a cutting board guide, and you will see there's videos there. There's information from different builders about designs. So there's a lot of stuff there. One of the questions we get every once in a while is, I want to make stuff for craft shows. Can I use WWGOA stuff to make a thing for, like, do we own some kind of intellectual property on that? Well, we do, because I made it, but we're providing that intellectual property to you to use. So if you like my cutting board design that's in that guide and you want to make 10,000 of those going into next Christmas, you go. That's why they're there. Logan says, how can I use the template to cut more inlays when I need them for future projects? You don't. You get the template from Slab, or you get the inlays from Slab Stitcher. Jim is calling me out, justifiably. Why didn't you use waterproof glue? Because I had a really long day yesterday. And I prepped all this stuff yesterday because I knew this morning was going to be a rush for me to be ready for 11 o'clock. And I grabbed original instead of Titebond 3. That whole cutting board was put together with Titebond 3. So Jim is correct. Normally, had my brain been firing on all cylinders, I would have grabbed Titebond 3 and put the inlay in with that same adhesive I used on the rest of the cutting board. I don't think in this case, nobody's going to saturate that cutting board to a point, I hope, where original is going to let go. But had I been, like I said, firing on all cylinders, I would have put Titebond 3 in there. Marcy says, what's the best finish to use if giving as a gift? What if the new owner doesn't have the same finish as originally used? So what I do when I give or sell cutting boards is I provide a card with them. And on that card, I tell them what the cutting board is made out of. They generally want to know, the Purple Heart walnut, everything that's in that board. And then I also say over time, if it starts to look tired, it can be refreshed with blank. And if I do whatever, if I put walrus oil on this today and they refresh it in a year with mineral oil, because that's easy to get, that's going to be fine. A lot of places sell butcher block oil, cutting board oil. There are a number of places you can get other products. Once your finish is dry and that cutting board's been wiped a few times, which is probably why it starts to look tired, you're not going to have a compatibility issue with whatever's using to refresh it. What I like about mineral oil is that you can walk into a pharmacy all day, every day and buy mineral oil. So it's very easy to get at, it's food safe, and it works pretty well for cutting boards. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end of the questions. A couple housekeeping things. Yes, today is the second Tuesday of the month. Today is not the 4 o'clock Q&A. That got postponed to a later Thursday. So watch your calendars for that. It's, I think, 2 weeks from now or so. Watch your email for that. I mentioned before the May Q&A, the May 4 o'clock Q&A is going to be a great one. Ryan is going to be here with me. He's a young guy who has really built up a woodworking business that is absolutely incredible. So he's going to be here to help. If you want to monetize your woodworking, you want to watch for the May Q&A when Ryan is here. He is going to be very, very helpful answering your questions about, a rifle shot, a straight line to making your shop successful on the monetizing side of things. So watch for that email. Other than that, I'm going to be at the Mark Adams School for a week of cabinet making class that I'm teaching. End of this month, if you're in that class, I will see you there. And then I think my next thing is I'll be at AWFS in Las Vegas, the big show in Vegas in July. We are out of questions. So Max, you can punch us out.